These tiny new Super 35 Rangers cine-zooms from LAOWA are really interesting little lenses. Like, I knew they were going to be small, but I didn't know they were going to be this small. You sort of have to see them to believe them. Plus, LAOWA sent me the light versions of these zooms, so they are a lot lighter, made from slightly different materials than the standard versions, and they cost around £500 more, $500 more. So I've been shooting on these lenses for a couple of weeks now. I actually brought them out on a week-long client job, so I'll be reporting back on that. That really gave me a chance to put them through their paces, but I've also shot with them in sunny London with my good friend Pierluigi, so we're going to feature a ton of sample footage so you can see what these lenses are capable of. I also got a chance to test these lenses out with the new DJI Focus Pro and got some really interesting results with them, so stick around for that. Primarily been using these lenses on my red Komodo, but I have also tested them on my LUMIX S5 2X, and we'll look at that a little bit later. You know, we're going to take a look at all the things. It's going to be a bit of a deep dive. We're going to look at how they perform, sharpness, lens breathing, chromatic aberration, flaring, minimum focus distance, you know, all the things you want to know before dropping your hard cash on these lenses. And, you know, who I think these are suited for and how they stack up against the competition. So if that all sounds interesting, stick around and let's get on with it. So these lenses are retailing at $5,700 for the set of standard, or $1,999 for a single lens. And then for the light versions of these lenses, they're around $2,500 for a single lens, and then $7,200 for the set. The only difference between the light version and the standard are the materials and the weight, so they still have the same optics. So if you do want to just save the money, I would probably just say go for the standard version. But if you are going to be flying these lenses on gimbals or drones, or you know, you want to pack really light, then definitely look at the light versions, because it is incredible how small and lightweight these things are. You know, every gram you can save from lugging on your back every day is a bonus. So the lenses come in three focal lengths. You've got the 11 to 18, the 17 to 50, and the 50 to 130. Obviously, the sort of full frame equivalent focal lengths that you'll get on your camera will depend on your crop factor. So the Komodo has a 1.33 times crop. It's quite a wide Super 35 camera, so it's quite nice to these lenses. These are sort of the equivalent focal lengths that you would get, the sort of full frame equivalent focal lengths you'd get. And then on a camera like the LUMIX S5 2X in APS-C mode, Super 35 mode. So it's a nice spread of focal lengths to work with. They are parfocal. You might have to shim them or adjust back focus. It's a really simple process. And there are details of how to do this in the manual. I really love the image coming from these lenses. I'd definitely say they're on the cleaner side. You know, they're quite neutral, but they're definitely not clinical or razor sharp. They do have a nice subtle focus fall off. I'm shooting sort of at a T4 on Super 35, so the plane of focus is a lot larger. So you've got a lot more wiggle room. So, you know, I think when shooting on razor sharp lenses like the Sigma Art lenses, if you miss focus even by a little bit, those lenses are very unforgiving. It's very noticeable. Whereas the focus fall off from these lenses is just much more subtle and pleasant, in my opinion. It's not as harsh. Colors also just seem really pleasing and vibrant, you know, not oversaturated or too sort of popcorny. They just seem really natural and neutral. Everything just really pops on these sunny scenes that we're seeing here. Again, if you're going to be using them on dock work, that's really good news. I just generally really love the footage I got back from the day we were out shooting in London. Like, I forget how beautiful London looks when we finally get some sun. It's been a long time coming this year. Minimum focus distance across these lenses is a bit of a mixed bag. It's great on the 17-50, you can get really nice tight shots on eyes, not quite macro, but you know, good enough. I guess this is the lens that people are going to be spending most time with, so that's really good to see. Next you got the 50-130. Again, it's not quite as good as the previous lens, but it's still good, completely usable. The only one in the set that I wish had a slightly better minimum focus is the 11-18. So when you are on the widest end of that 11-18, you do begin to feel it when you're trying to get close to your subject. And you can see here, this is about as close as you can get. It's just a little bit too limiting for me, and it's probably the one thing that stops this lens from being absolutely perfect. Wide open, there is some chromatic aberration on these lenses. It's not crazy, it is kind of subtle, but I guess I'm not really a huge fan of the sort of chromatic aberration that seems to pop up on LAOWA's lenses. I noticed it before on their anamorphic zooms. It's this kind of like magenta green, almost like fuzzy 3D glasses effect that you get around sort of sharp, contrasty edges, and I just don't love it. But the good news is it sort of disappears as soon as you stop down a little bit. So as soon as you move past T2.9, it sort of disappears, which is absolutely fine for me. Again, you're probably not gonna notice it unless you're really looking close up on the footage, but you know, when I'm staring at this footage after making this review, it was something I did begin to notice when I was working with shots that were shot wide open. 50-130 seems to have some really interesting barrel distortion going on. I actually quite like it, but it does sort of give this lens a slightly different look to the other lenses. It almost gives this sort of quite swirly, almost sort of Helios-like look to the out of focus area. And it can be used quite creatively, like you can see here some of the bokeh reflected from the water. It kind of looks really nice and dreamy, and also some of these shots in the trees. I really like it. It adds a lot of character to these lenses. I guess my only issue is that it does feel quite different to some of the other lenses, and this behavior sort of changes a bit as you zoom in and out. So something to bear in mind. It's not world ending for me. Again, as its own thing, I quite like it. But it's a subtle thing. 90% of the time, you're just not going to notice it. Flaring, they do flare. I love the way that they flare, especially on this wide angle lens here. You can see as we're walking into the sun in central London, you just get these beautiful sort of streaky flares that look, in my opinion, very cinematic. They add a lot of drama and texture to the scene, a lot of interest. It's definitely doing something for me. Whether you like it, that's completely up to you. Finally, lens breathing is also pretty well controlled. It is there, but like it's not enough to really sort of bother me or sort of ruin the shots or anything. Again, lens breathing is not something I'm particularly sensitive about. I know some people find it a bit of a deal breaker. I think on the context of the sort of jobs that I'm going to be using them, something like the sort of subtle lens breathing that these lenses exhibit isn't really going to be a problem for me. The lens breathing behavior does seem to sort of change a little bit depending on where you are on the zoom on each lens. And I did find the 50-130 maybe did also display the most aggressive focus breathing. But you can see here on some of these tests and sort of judge for yourself. It does seem to be a little bit more intense at the wider end of the zooms. But yeah, look at these tests and you can judge for yourself. Generally, I think a lot of these lenses will be used for run and gun documentary work where you're not really going to be wanting a crazy depth of field. Shooting at the T4 is probably where most people are going to be shooting at with these lenses. So I took these lenses out on a week-long client job, and overall they performed impeccably across the week. I was really impressed with them. I was kind of blown away by how I could get these free lenses in my Peli case with my Komodo and just how tiny and lightweight they were. I was just kind of blown away by how these free lenses could cover pretty much everything we needed to shoot. So this project involved shooting lots of interviews, lit interviews, and then lots of running around getting B-roll, but also shooting lots of architecture and buildings. And these lenses covered all of those scenarios perfectly. The 17-50 was the most used lens. We stopped down a little bit. We rarely shot wide open on these lenses, and I think we were hovering around the T4 and just below for the majority of it. The wide angle lens was great for shooting buildings and architecture, but they were all fantastic in combination. And just being able to walk around on location with a tiny backpack with these lenses on us was so much more efficient than, you know, bringing around a huge Peli case full of my DZO Vespids. And also there were just less lens swaps across the day. You know, we only had 3 lenses to swap between, and you know, the majority of that was on the 17 to 50, and then we were just using the other 2 lenses for sort of specialist details, close-ups and sort of ultra wides and stuff. So yeah, my overall impression of using these lenses for professional work is a big thumbs up. So on the same job, I was also working with Matthias de Oliveira, and he just happened to have gotten his hands on the new DJI Focus Pro. So at the end of the shoot, we decided to chuck that on the Komodo with these lenses. I was just kind of blown away by the performance of this and the combination of these. And I am definitely going to be picking up this system to use with these lenses, because having these parfocal lenses and this LiDAR focus system just meant that you could just sort of run around, punch in and out on the zoom, and the DJI Focus Pro kept focus all along the way. And I think it's a really compelling argument for picking up these tiny zooms alongside that DJI Focus Pro to give yourself this really competent solo shooter autofocus setup while still having the benefit of these cine-zooms. So that was really cool. Also tested these lenses out on my other favourite Super 35 camera, the LUMIX S5 2X. Yes, this is a full frame sensor, but it shoots beautiful Super 35 footage. Just whack the camera in APS-C mode and these lenses work perfectly. The other benefit of shooting in this mode on this camera is that you get a much faster sensor readout, so you get much nicer motion on this camera. And I think these lenses just pair beautifully with this camera. I would legitimately and happily shoot a project in Super 35 mode on this camera. You know, I think a lot of people are a bit snobbish about setting their camera into Super 35 mode, but you're really missing out on a whole range of Super 35 lenses that are more than capable of being used on this camera and this sensor. But what about stabilization? Some of you might say with zoom lenses, you can't dial in the focal length on the IBIS on this camera, and that's completely right. So my tip would be to disable the IBIS and go with stabilization. With the new 3.0 firmware update, these cameras have an excellent high mode on the E-stabilization, and I tested this with both medium and high, and both gave great results. I think if I was shooting all day on my S5 with some zoom lenses, I would probably opt for these smaller Super 35 lenses over the full frame variants. So prior to getting my hands on these lenses, I had actually been looking to get some cine-zooms for some time. So I looked at the DZO Film Pictures, their Kata Aces. Neither of those kind of really did it for me. There was a combination of the focal length range, the size, some of the color shifts between the focal lengths. So eventually I sort of landed on the full frame LAOWA Rangers, and those were the lenses I was very close to pulling the trigger on, actually, until these were announced and until I got my hands on these. And I think now these are the lenses I'm going to go for. If you shoot on a Super 35 system, these are probably the best zoom lenses you can pick up for the money. Especially for anyone who shoots factual, documentary, branded docs, you know, any type of work where you're on location, you're moving around and you want to sort of avoid those constant lens swaps, but you still want the ergonomics and the image quality of a cinema lens. So I think these are going to be a dream to shoot on for a lot of those types of people, especially if you hate lugging around lots of primes and lots of equipment and you want to be light on your feet. Usually when I go out lens testing for this channel, I normally do it outside somewhere in London. You know, I carry everything in a big camera backpack. And by the end of the day, from operating the camera handheld on my Komodo with the bag on, I normally feel absolutely exhausted, my back is broken, but that didn't happen with these lenses. I wasn't hobbling when I went home, and that's a big deal for someone like me. Like, I've got a slip disc in my back, so anywhere where I can lighten the load that I'm filming on is just amazing. I shoot a lot of handheld, and I found that even on the longer zoom, which tend to be quite heavy lenses traditionally, I was able to get nice stable footage. I think had that been a really heavy full frame zoom, I definitely would have needed to bring an easy rig with me because my arms after a day of shooting would have been trembling. So if your budget's limited and you're only going to pick up one, or you're going to build the set out over a period of time, obviously the 17-50 is going to be the most useful for most people. It's going to be your main workhorse lens. It's going to give you, the most coverage in the sort of useful focal range. And then I guess you might want to pick up the longer zoom and finally get the wider zoom. But I guess it all depends on your style of shooting. I will say that the 11-18 is probably the most fun out of the set. Having such a small wide angle zoom lens is really cool. I really enjoyed using that. I think I enjoyed using that the most just because it gave me the most wild, interesting footage. I just wish it had a slightly better minimum focus distance. I definitely think I'm going to be picking these lenses up for my professional work. I'm really grateful to LAOWA for sending me them. Of course, if I have missed anything, just let me know down in the comments below. But yeah, that's all for now. Thanks for watching, and until next time, see you later.